Good evening, and welcome to the very first podcast of the Central States Lawman and Outlaws Historic Association. My name is Gene Stevens, and I'm the founder of this organization, which was founded in 2024. I am a writer and a blogger, and I've written several books on the frontier in the American West. And some of you might know me from my works on Jesse James history and frontier history on the Black Hawk War. I've also given a couple presentations, one at the James Farm last year, and this is 2026 now, by the way. And I recently gave a talk on the Jesse James train robbery in 1873 in Adair, Iowa, at the Boone Scenic Railroad Museum up in Boone, Iowa. So, like I said, you might know me from those works. If you don't know me, it's nice to meet all of you. And this evening, I want to start my first podcast on a fairly well-known figure in American history, but kind of somebody who was in the background, and that was the father of the famed lawman Wyatt Earp, and his name was Nicholas Porter Earp. But I want to start out with a poem that I wrote about Nicholas. I find Nicholas to be a very interesting figure, and he played a very central role in his son's lives. When he was actually from Illinois, Monmouth, Illinois, and eventually migrated to Pella, Iowa, and from there they went to San Bernardino, California, and that's how his sons ended up going west after the Civil War. But I wrote a poem about Nicholas, and I want to recite that poem here first. It goes like this: Some died on the frontier, while some could never be killed. Those who survived well were sometimes despised. The modern weak seek to destroy the strength and honor they can never have. Lies cloaked as heroism are the words by which they abide. The true story is that Nick Earp was hell on wheels, a true man of steel. It took grit to conquer the wide prairie, and there was a grave every mile. The lady who complained was not fit to judge. She risked the lives of all for ego and nothing more. If it wasn't for old Nick, the Indians would have settled the score like they did many times before. They crossed the great prairie like so many did at the time, and he was a captain who navigated the trail and brought his people to San Bernardino alive. And that was by me, G.C. Stevens. And this is a quote from a writer who was in the Phoenix, Arizona area. His name is Scott Dyke. But Scott Dyke had told me one time, to understand Wyatt Earp, you must know Nicholas Earp. And deservedly so, because despite the fact that there's sound bites and historic documentaries and Hollywood movies, these actually do real research, a great disservice. And the story of Nicholas Earp, the father of the famed Wyatt Barry Stapp Earp, is one figure in American history that deserves a better investigation. Nicholas Porter Earp was born the son of Walter and Martha Ann Earp in 1813. He married Virginia Ann Cooksey, and his most famous son, Wyatt Earp, was born in 1848. Nick was an adventurer. He was an entrepreneur. He was a soldier, a sergeant, and political leader. And for some reason, these aspects of Nick Earp's life are kind of glossed over or juxtaposed against Wyatt Earp's life, kind of like a comma in a sentence. But he was much more influential in his sons' lives. In one documentary, in fact, it was a PBS documentary on Wyatt Earp that was made a few years ago, which I thought was a fairly good documentary. There was an environmental historian by the name of Andrew Eisenberg who described Nicholas Earp as colorful. He was larger than life, but he stated, but to round him out, he was a deadbeat, which probably isn't fair. I don't think it is fair. And he skipped out on debts, and he was a drinker. But to describe Nicholas Earp, and this is my opinion, from a 21st century perspective is nearly impossible. And I think that modern historians are frequently either off base, out of line, or misinformed when they try to judge the frontier and that time in history by a 21st century perspective. There is just no comparison between the two. And I think it's lost on a modern historian who fails to understand how difficult people's lives really were during that time. Nick was a very strong father figure. He was a military sergeant. in a time when all warfare was conducted on a new frontier, and it was bloody and it was brutal during that time. And he had crossed the continent during wartime and experienced things that very few modern men could survive, and that's just, again, my opinion. The Earp family was of English, Scots-Irish descent. The first immigrants arrived in the American colonies was Thomas Earp Jr., who arrived in Anne Arundel County on July 6, 1674, as an indentured servant from Ireland. He's buried in St. Anne's Parish in Annapolis. Nicholas was named for a circuit-riding judge in Kentucky. Nicholas's father, Walter Earp, was born in Montgomery County, Maryland in 1787. He was a fifth-generation Marylander who became a school teacher and a justice of the peace in Monmouth, Illinois, and a Methodist Episcopal preacher. Nicholas's mother, Martha Ann Early, was born in Avery County, North Carolina on August 28, 1790. Nicholas was the third of 10 children. His siblings included 6 brothers, Lorenzo Dow, Josiah Jackson, James Kelly, Francis Aubrey, Jonathan Douglas, and Walter C. Were twins, as well as 3 sisters, Elizabeth, Mary Ann, Sarah Ann. When Martha Earp died at age 91, she had 8 living children, 85 grandchildren, and 130 great-grandchildren, and 13 great-great-grandchildren. So this is quite a family that people in the 21st century most certainly would find hard to understand, but different time, different place. Soon after Nicholas's birth, the family moved from Virginia to Hartford, Kentucky in 1813, where Nicholas spent the rest of his childhood as a young man. Nicholas may have served in the Black Hawk War of 1831, but no record was found in the state of Illinois Black Hawk War records online. We do, however, know that he served as a sergeant in the Mexican-American War. During the Mexican-American War, Nicholas served under Captain Wyatt Barry Staff of the Illinois Mounted Volunteers. Then, during the Civil War, Nicholas served in Pella, Iowa, as the United States Provost Marshal for recruitment. His sons Newton, James, and Virgil enlisted in the Union Army on November 11, 1861. While his father was busy recruiting drilling companies, Wyatt, along with his 2 younger brothers, Morgan and Warren, were left in charge of tending the 18-acre corn crop. Only 13 years old, Wyatt was too young to enlist, but he tried on several occasions to run away to enlist. Each time his father found him and brought him back home. In May of 1864, the family, the Earps, began to plan and move to get a wagon train together to head west to San Bernardino, California. 40 wagons and 150 immigrants lined up at Pella, Iowa. Nicholas, who was a captain, led the caravan across the Missouri River into Omaha, Nebraska. Beyond, 16-year-old Wyatt was in charge of the Earps wagon as stock. He also draws a hunter's job, and with a gift from his father of an under and over combination rifle shotgun, he was able to keep the group of 20 people and fresh meat all the way to California. And this was from the Illustrated Life and Times of Wyatt Earp by Bob Bowes Bell. The story of Wyatt Earp's surroundings is carried to the point where his father resigns from the Army as Provost Marshal with his family and begins a covered wagon journey to California. A letter from Ira Kent in Houghton Mifflin, or from Houghton Mifflin, from Stuart Lake in reference to content from Wyatt Earp from Frontier Marshal. These are some references that I'm citing. We know quite a bit about the Earps' trip to San Bernardino, California, thanks to a member of his wagon train by the name of Sarah Rousseau. She was the wife of a doctor born into a well-to-do English family in 1816 by the name of Sarah Jane Daglish. According to author Nicholas Cataldo, she bloomed into a highly educated woman. When she came to America, she lived for a while in the Michigan area, presumably the Michigan Territory at the time. As Michigan gained statehood in 1855, she married a physician by the name of James A. Rousseau, and they moved to Kentucky in 1839 before eventually moving to Knoxville, Iowa. So it's probable that Sarah Jane, at some time early in her life, encountered the Native Americans. This is mentioned because multiple encounters with Indians would occur in the coming months. It just so happens that sometime shortly after the move to Knoxville, they decided to risk a distant and arduous and highly dangerous trip to California by way of wagon train, and Nicholas Earp's plan for Moving White and his family out of the area from their home in Pella, Iowa began after Brother Jim's discharge from the Union Army. The Civil War would soon be over, and the flood of pioneers moving west was just beginning for the ghost to manifest destiny that would drive people far into the interior of the continent. The wagon train west rendezvoused in Pella, Iowa, and departed on May 12th of 1864. It wasn't long before and early into the trip that people in the wagon train began to experience difficulties. It started with the Curtises losing a cow and a horse. The cow was not recovered. Later in the journey, it started becoming apparent that the entire trip was going to be fraught with danger as they began to encounter people that were dishonest and not obliging. Upon reaching the Missouri River, one of the wagon train folks, a small child, fell from the wagon and being pulled by the mules and was run over. He fortunately recovered, but by this time it was becoming very apparent that the undisciplined people on the wagon train were heading into a terrible situation. The entire trip was fraught with internal fighting and lack of cooperation from the families who were on board the wagon train, and Sarah Jane probably did more to aggravate the situation rather than help. The one thing that was good, that she was good at, was documenting her surroundings. She reported on the weather, the birds, the temperature of the day, the rivers, the grass that was present, Indians and people being sick. And one of the persons she disliked the most was the wagon master, and that was Nicholas Earp. On July 7th and 8th, Mrs. Rousseau made the following entry in her diary, and it read, the title was, "While at Fort Laramie." She says, "We have to keep a close watch day and night over the stock. Mr. Earp went out to see about the guards, or military guards, and found that they had got up to dance, and he told them they must quit their dancing while they're on duty. Certainly a common sense request." Mrs. Rousseau understood that they needed the livestock looked after, but she continued with her entry. And she says one of the soldiers told him to mind his own business and ordered him off. It made him awful mad, and he was for killing. He used profane language. He could hardly be appeased, but he cooled down after a while. Could it be that Nicholas actually had concern for the people on a wagon train? I would say so. Other scenarios and issues plagued the wagon train. They had frequent encounters with Indians during the course of the journey. Upon running into the Paiute Indians, Sarah declared that they were a tribe that is very fond of horse flesh to eat and great hands to steal anything they can get their hands on. And the problems continued from there. And she says we crossed the Santa Clara 14 times a day after going 12 miles, made dry camp at Camp Springs after filling our kegs at the last two crossing places. The Indian chief told the guide that we must give them something for traveling through their country, to remunerate them for using water and grass. We all gave them some flour. We intended to let them have the care of our horses tonight. They're going to take cattle as well. The chief with four feathers we kept as prisoners until the morning, until they brought back the stock. Then they will be free. The following day, Sarah Jane Rousseau's diary states that they fed the Indians who were with them. Nicholas was apparently unhappy about the decision and derided the members of the wagon train, but the loss of food and stock would prove nearly deadly towards the end of the long trip, because the same day they were beginning to enter a crucial stage of their travels. As Sarah Jane reported seeing unusual trees, probably cactus, because shortly after this, Sarah Jane also reported that they had entered into the desert, but she erroneously blamed the situation on Nicholas Earp, a mistake that he did not make, a mistake that was done independently by the people of the wagon train and not the wagon master, who it appears was being undermined. She then says we fed 5 among us. All are willing to do so, but Mr. Earp, he swears and cuts up about it. Although he derives the same benefit as the rest of us, I fear he may cause some of us some trouble when we get to the muddy. On November 16, 1864, Mrs. Rousseau reported that they were approaching an area somewhere between Las Vegas, Nevada, and the Salt Springs, California, where they were traversing a very difficult sandy terrain, and it seems that the social fabric of the wagon train members were declining as time went on. The coming days would prove to be a test of will and survival as they approached California. Mrs. Rousseau documented their crossing over steep mountains, and she stated towards the top there was a perpendicular rock some 6 feet to get up, besides others not so bad. we all doubled up on teams, but Mr. Earp's wagon, he's up that stated that the Awful Mountain with our mayor and Mr. Hamilton started to span mules after them to get them along. They got up safely. It appeared to me that they didn't care if he killed our horses or not. If he had, he wouldn't have tried to go only with two. All of the Indians have traveled with us today. Then on the following day, there's an entry where Mrs. Rousseau says they went about 10 miles and met some 30 or 40 Indians, large and small, and she watered our horses and ate luncheon. They went 2 miles further and then they camped. All the Indians followed on, and they had given them more to eat and herded stock. So there's some astounding things in Sarah Rousseau's diary, and it appears to really exemplify the lack of discipline or breakdown of discipline and what's going on. But it also shows a further contempt for Nicholas Earp as the captain of the wagon train at this point, and as an observation, conjecture didn't kill animals, but giving away supplies in the way of food and provisions could have been very deadly in these circumstances at this point. And angers were flaring, tempers were flaring on the wagon train. And Mrs. Rousseau had made yet another entry in her diary, but whether or not she ever tried to speak with Mr. Earp about some of the complaints she had is never really mentioned in her diary. On November 25th, she says, this evening Mr. Earp had another rippet or an argument with a Warren, the youngest Earp son, and they were fighting with another member of the wagon train by the name of Jimmy Hallen, and they commenced all the children used profane language and swore if the children's parents didn't correct the children, he would whip every last one of them. He still shows out more and more every day of what kind of man he is. And of course, it sounds like he was becoming increasingly aggravated with the situation and the occupants and the people on the wagon train, and maybe rightfully so at this point. But on Tuesday, December 6, 1864, members of the wagon train were in a very tenuous situation, and it appeared that the lack of discipline and judgment was really taking its toll. They were really low on food. They were starving, and their livestock was giving out. They were very close to dying in the desert, and I think they knew it, and the stress was becoming insurmountable at this point in time. And there's another entry. It says, how my heart aches to see them. They look like skeletons. This is referring to the animals who are dying. And they act so pitifully, begging for something to eat. They try to dry brush or anything they can get a hold of. We went 3 miles when we stopped, and they couldn't travel any further. The poor children have walked most of the way, and now they feel extremely desolate. We had to let the poor little boys go back with Mac and the horses in Bitter Springs, and there may be some grass there that may save the poor things from starving to death. And what bitter tears I have shed thinking of our condition here in the wild desert with small quantity of flour, enough to care in the last few days. But along the way, they had been apparently assailed by the Indians and were giving their food away, which wasn't helpful. But lo and behold, the wagon train did reach San Bernardino on the 17th of December in '64. The family set up camp just east of today's San Bernardino County Courthouse. The town was greeted the newcomers. It was a pretty tough western town at the time. It was known for its saloon, gambling halls, and red light district and South D Street. According to author Nicholas Cataldo, this was Nick's kind of town. So that's Nicholas Earp, Nick Earp, the man of steel, probably the hard drinking, hard nosed, typical man figure. A sense of morals and justice and duty and the courage to apply those traits are instilled by God in a strong father figure, and I think that Nick was a strong father figure, and judging by what his sons did in the Wild West later on, I think that's very apparent. But anyway, Nicholas and family, they were quick to settle down in San Bernardino. The Earps rented a farm on the Carpenter Ranch near the Santa Ana River. A letter was written to a friend in Pella, James Coppola. The senior Earp made some small talk and bragged about California and the great weather, but then reflected on the trip from Pella, California, saying, I did not start from home expecting to stop here. When we got here, we were all so near run through that we could not go any longer. And while living on the Carpenter Ranch, Nick Earp visited downtown San Bernardino regularly and became a rather well-known figure, championing the cause of common man against, that is, defying the hypocrisy of big business and politicians. Nick was also elected the foreman of a grand jury in 1867. But the Earp clan was a very restless bunch, and one day son Wyatt took a little vacation and ran away. But according to historian Glenn Boyer, Wyatt returned and was whipped by Nick because farm life did not appeal to the Earp boys. Sons Jim and Morgan Earp had gone to mining towns in Montana, while Virgil and Wyatt worked for a while with a Salt Lake-bound freight wagon, and later the Union Pacific Railroad. But in 1868, frustrated that no one would help with the farm, Nick headed back to the Midwest. Nick looked up Virgil and Wyatt, who found work with the Union Pacific Railhead in Wyoming, and they all made a trip back to Iowa. And the Earps minus Virgil, of course, James and Wyatt, returned to Southern California. Upon his return to California, which Nick eventually did return there, Nick stopped by the San Bernardino and bid on a janitor's job position in a courthouse, but lost to somebody else. He was able to find employment, so the family moved into a small farm community southeast of Corona, a town called Temescal. While there, they did some farming and ran a grocery store there for a couple of years. While there, Nick got involved in politics and stirred up rivalries amongst its residents over the issues of proposed California Constitution and the virtues of the newly formed Greenback Party. He was an ardent follower of the Greenback Party, which was organized in 1874. The group was opposed to the retirement or reduction of the greenback and favored an increase as only paper currency. Nicholas even wrote an essay on the subject called The Greenback Question, which was published in 1878, in July of 1878. Unfortunately, the Greenback Party nominees lost the election, but the state constitution that they fought for passed and is still in effect today, and Nicholas Earp had a big part in that. During the later years of Southern California, Nick was a saloon keeper. He was elected Justice of the Peace in Colton, California in 1884. 2 years later, Virgil Earp ran for constable in Colton, and he won. Nick was also reelected to the Justice of the Peace and also a chapter member of the San Bernardino Society of Pioneers in 1888. In December of 1897, the old frontiersman was seriously injured after he fell from a horse. Nick died in the old soldiers' home in Sawtell, near Los Angeles, on February 12, 1907. He was 93 years old at the time. And that ends this segment of my first podcast on Nicholas Earp. I appreciate everybody taking the time. As you could hear, it was a little bit rough around the edges. This is the first one, and hopefully this is the first more to come to add to what I do with my blog and my writing. But I appreciate everybody's time, and we'll see you on the Dusty Trail.